fighting that took place here, but to better help you understand what 18th century warfare looks like. 1 o'clock this afternoon, we will be doing, recreating, for your benefit and education, in a small way, a depiction of the Battle of Great Bridge that took place here on this very site on December 9th, 1775. In terms of safety, we've got this extremely impressive barrier, this red line on the ground. We ask that everyone remain on the other side of it. That's for your safety, for your benefit. Our intent today is to provide a little bit of a tactical demonstration in reality and historical fact. There was some skirmishing and fighting that went on for approximately 10 days before the actual Battle of Great Bridge that took place here on the site on December 9th, 1775. I like to answer questions. I like to interact with the audience. So if you have questions, don't be shy about putting up your hand or hollering at me. Oh, and for your benefit, I'm portraying Captain William Tolliver, who commanded the 4th Company of the 2nd Virginia Regiment here at Great Bridge in 1775. What's that thing around your neck? People ask me that all the time. This thing is called, it's a French word, it's called a gorget, spelled G-O-R-G-E-T. It is the last remaining vestige of medieval armor. In the days when knights rode horses and were completely encased in iron or steel armor, there was a plate that covered their throat, called a gorget. By the time of the 1770s, this is all that remains, but it's a symbol. It's a symbol of officers. It's a symbol of command. And you will find, if you look closely at these gorgets, they typically have the coat of arms. If you look at the ones worn by British officers, you'll see the King's coat of arms, as you would expect, because they are officers of King George. Mine has the old coat of arms of the colony of Virginia, because I am a Virginia officer. That's what it means. You hear some gunfire in the background. The theoretical story that we're presenting for you today is of a British Army foraging party. What's a foraging party? A foraging party is when troops go out into the countryside to look for additional food to supplement what the Army feeds them. Because of the gunfire that you see in your front, you begin to see some of the small Virginia Army being mustered to meet this threat. Let's talk about weapons for a moment. Most of the weapons that you'll see on the field today, we actually have a piece or two of artillery. That kind of speaks for itself. But the small arms that the soldiers carry fall into two categories. Most of the soldiers, all of the British soldiers, and a very large proportion of the Virginia contingent, or as the British would call them, the rebels, are armed with smoothbore flintlock weapons. Some of them are military in their nature. The British soldiers carry something which we remember down through history as the Brown Bess. That was a nickname given to the British soldiers' musket sometime in the 18th century. That's the musket that won the British Empire. It was such an important weapon in British military history. Rudyard Kipling, the famous chronicler of Queen Victoria's army in the 19th century, wrote a poem about Brown Bess. It is not, by modern standards, an effective weapon. It is at close range. We're talking about a gun that has a bore, or the diameter of the opening of the barrel is 75 caliber. That's 3/4 of an inch. It fires a ball which is undersized. So in many respects, the weapon of the British soldier, by analogy, is kind of like blowing a pea through a straw, because there is no rifling in this weapon. There is no spin on the bullet. So it goes, like I say, like a peaceful straw. Its effective range is only about 100 yards. That's about the length of a football field. Most battles that are fought in the 18th century by armies armed with smoothbore flintlock muskets are fought at less than 100 yards. Some of them at distances as small as 40 yards. When these blocks of troops slam away at each other with these weapons, and the idea is these blocks of troops act like a giant shotgun against that other block of troops. They're hurling lead as much and as fast as they can with the idea that probability is what will score hits. Now the troops that you see in your front, the ones with the green feathers, those are light infantry, British light infantry. They are armed, equipped, and trained to move quickly, frequently in more open order, to be able to protect the Army's flanks, to act as skirmishers, and perform other light duty of that type. So typically, whenever the British Army fights, the first British troops that are going to fire on the other side are going to be members of the light infantry, like you see here. On the other side, the Virginia military organization that we see here today are armed largely with weapons of the same type. Some of them are old military, British military weapons, again the brown vest. Some of these men on the other side will be carrying something called a fowling piece. A fowling piece is the 18th century name for shotgun. It's a weapon you use against birds and small game. The advantage of a smoothbore gun is, yeah, you can fire shot out of it. You can fire buckshot out of it. You can fire a single large round ball that fits the bore of that gun, and then it's like an equivalent of the British Army musket. So, in the 18th century, in the Virginia colony, if a man could only afford one gun, and the colonial law required the head of the household to have a firearm and to have a specified quantity of ammunition, your best bet would be buy a smoothbore gun, buy a fowling piece. You can hunt birds with it, you can hunt small game with it, and when you're called to do militia duty, you can carry it off into military service. I've saved the most interesting weapon for last, because again, among the Virginians that you see at your left front, the ones from the western part of the Virginia colony, the area which is approaching the frontier, many of these men are armed with a weapon called the American long rifle. Some people call it the Pennsylvania long rifle. Some people call it the Kentucky long rifle. It's all the same weapon. This is state-of-the-art technology. A rifle-barreled gun, which is the way they described them in the 18th century, is a smaller bore gun which has spiral grooves cut into the inside of the gun barrel. This is an idea that originates in Central Europe, what we would call today Germany or Austria and Switzerland, in as early as the 1500s. But the concept comes to America, the colonial era, carried by Germanic gunsmiths who settled primarily in Pennsylvania, and the weapon evolves here in the American environment, such that it is an excellent weapon for hunting, for larger game, for hunting deer, bear, other large game, but it is also an excellent weapon to use if you're living on the frontier and you're faced with the possibility of Indian war. So many Western Virginians are armed with the long rifle, and it will play an important part in what happens here at Great Bridge in December of 1775. It is much more accurate than the British soldier's musket. It is, you can hit a man, a target the size of a man, at as much as 400 yards. That's 4 times the effective range of the British soldier's musket, and it is extremely accurate. Extremely accurate. So, why doesn't everybody have a rifle? Well, think about it. It's state-of-the-art technology. That means that the man who uses it has to be skilled in the use of it. That takes a long time. It's state-of-the-art technology. That also means it's more expensive than a common British soldier's musket. But here's the key point. The British infantry can load and fire their muskets as quickly as 3 to 4 times a minute. It takes between, for somebody that's fast and good with it, between 1 and 2 minutes for each shot with the American long rifle. That's the downside. There's another downside too. The British soldiers that you see in your front have muskets that can be equipped with bayonets. So even when the weather is terrible and the powder gets wet, each British soldier always has a spear in effect. The American long rifle is a civilian weapon. It's not equipped with a bayonet. So the consequence of that is the British are terrified of the American long rifle when the war begins in 1775, but they overcome their fear of the American long rifle when they actually engage American troops armed with the rifle, because they discover that if they don't bother to shoot, reload, shoot, if they just fix their bayonets and charge American riflemen, those riflemen get their first round off, but they'll be on top of them with their bayonets before they're able to reload. British troops had a horrific prejudice against this weapon, which they considered the weapon almost of an assassin. So in the early part of the war, American riflemen, when captured by British soldiers or caught on the field, the old term is they are given no quarter. Anybody here know what that means? What's it mean when one side says no quarter to the other side? Says, we're not taking prisoners. If we catch you with this assassin's weapon, you'll be executed on the spot. The Battle of Long Island that occurred a little less than a year after the fight here at Great Bridge, many American long riflemen, the story goes, were found pinned to trees with bayonets, and that's the way that the British soldiers left them, because of their tremendous prejudice against this very effective American weapon. Some people say that the American long rifle was the weapon that won the Revolutionary War. Some people say the American long rifle didn't really play much of a role, but the truth is somewhere in between. Somewhere in between. Even General Washington himself, after a while, said to the colonies, "Don't send me any more riflemen. I have enough. I can use them on the frontier against the Indians. I can use a few of them with the main army as skirmishers. But American riflemen need those infantrymen carrying smoothbore weapons and bayonets to support them. Because when they're caught out in the open by themselves, the British go right through them." So you've seen the British troops, the light troops, and now the grenadiers. The grenadiers are out there, those men that wear those tall, black, bearskin caps. So let's talk a minute about how the British Army is organized. A British infantry regiment typically consists of 8 to 10 companies. There's 3 different types of soldiers in a British regiment. We're going to start with the most elite and work our way through. The most elite men in a British infantry regiment are the grenadiers. They are the tallest, the strongest, the smartest, the best soldiers in the regiment get put into the grenadier company. They're now making their way back again. The symbol of their military prowess is that tall, black grenadier's cap made of black bear skin, black bear fur. The term comes from an earlier time when a grenadier's role on the battlefield was to actually do what? Hurl a grenade. There was such a thing. Imagine a sort of a cast iron round bomb with a fuse sticking out of it. Of course, you got to light that fuse. The grenadiers, even at this late date, often have a metallic tube-type device attached to their crossbelts. This holds a slow match, which is a type of cord immersed in chemicals and lit so it burns very slowly and holds a light. So they actually, in the old days, took those grenades, lit them from this case carrying this slow match, and then, because they were bigger and stronger, hurled them. That's the history of the Grenadiers. They're the best troops in the British infantry, and they're always first. When they're in line, they're on the right. That is the position of honor in a British infantry regiment. The next group we have are the light infantry. And you've seen them. They were the ones with the green feathers. These men are generally smaller, but extremely athletic and energetic, quick thinking, because they're used as skirmishers. They're used as light troops. When there's a mission that requires speed and quick thinking, the light infantry is sent out. And then there's everybody else. And these men wear a thing that in the 18th century was called a cocked hat. I'm wearing a cocked hat. The term three-cornered hat, that doesn't exist in the 18th century. This is called a cocked hat because it's a hat which is cocked up on three sides. In a British infantry regiment, the majority, 80% of the British soldiers in the regiment, are members of what are called